Everyone, how's it going? This is Richard, and welcome back to our stock market outlook video sponsored by MarketSmith. As always, we'll run through the market indexes, leading stocks, a few different sources of sentiment, the IBD big picture article, and finally the wishing wealth GMI signal. And at the very end of the video, I'll synthesize all those different sources of information and give you my take about the overall health of the market. As always, if you do find this analysis helpful, please go ahead and take the time right now to leave me a like down below. It just takes a few seconds and helps me out immensely. And of course, subscribe if you haven't yet and want to see more videos just like this one, as well as interviews with great traders, investors, tutorials, all that good stuff. So make sure you go ahead and do that. I'll give you just a few seconds once again to leave me a like down below. And with that said, let's dive right in with the market indexes. First things first, looking at the NASDAQ composite, you can see we had a very negative day on this Friday, undercutting these lows. And overall, we were down almost 4% on the NASDAQ composite, over 4% on the NASDAQ 100, the QQQ, and we undercut all the positive action that had been occurring on these 2 days. And a lot of leading stocks as well took significant hits on this Friday, undercutting recent higher lows that they had put in. Overall, you can see we also undercut this key swing kind of high here, and we're back below a declining 21 EMA now. We're still above a rising 50 SMA, but we are also below a declining 200 SMA. So on most of the time frames, the trend is down as of this moment. I also want to go over to a 60-minute chart because this gives you a better sense of the short-term time frame. You can see back here we are making higher highs as well as higher lows here, and then that kind of trend change right at this moment. You can see the trend line was broken. Then we started making lower highs and lower lows, and you can see that this rally attempt really was just a lower high where we got rejected. The short-term trend line was broken, and we saw a pretty systematic selling into the end of the day on Friday, negating this positive action that we're seeing here, potentially pushing back towards these highs, trying to fill this gap, but we couldn't, and we got rejected on higher volume, and it remains to be seen where we find support here. As I mentioned, this is a key spot to watch. We're pretty much right at that level, but then lower down, there's other spots on the daily and weekly chart to be aware of as well. But right now in the short term, we're in a downtrend, and going back to that daily chart, we're downtrend on most of these time frames, and going back to a weekly even, you can see we're rejected, downside reversal on this week, and then fall through to the downside. You've got an unfilled gap right here, and we're right at that key moving average. So a lot of reasons to be a little bit conservative, defensive here during this time. If you're a day trader or swing trader, you're probably loving this volatility, especially to the downside. But if you're a longer term investor, position trader, you should be more cautious and just waiting for your spots and waiting for the setups to really show that the bull market is in force. So right now the trend is kind of negative on most of the time frames. Looking on over to the S&P 500, this looks very similar. Let's go back to a daily chart. Pretty much identical action, undercutting these lows, down 3.37%. Volume a pickup from the previous 2 days, but not huge. And overall, just basically undercutting the 21 EMA, still above that rising 50 SMA. So pretty similar action to the NASDAQ. You can see we were rejected right at that 200 SMA on this moving average. Moving on over to the IWM, the Russell 2000. This gives you a sense of kind of how mid caps are performing. And we're seeing pretty much the same sort of action, rejected at that 200 SMA, undercutting this level, and very negative action on this Friday on an increase in volume. Looking at the IWO, which is kind of the Russell 2000 growth index, just kind of focusing on growth stocks themselves. You can see we're a little bit stronger. We're holding above this high right here. This will be an area to watch, but we're still undercutting that 21 EMA, as well as these weekly lows with that Friday move. And we were also rejected at that 200 SMA. So still a lot of work to do. Honestly, we could just kind of chop sideways for the next few weeks. I think that would be very constructive. It would set up a lot of charts, build some bases after initial moves up, and then we could expect some breakouts from those bases. But once again, we don't have to predict. We just have to analyze what's actually going on. Also taking a look at the FFTY, the Innovator IBD50 ETF. This is overall weaker. We didn't even rally into its 200 SMA. In the short term, it is holding that 21 EMA, but the 50 SMA is still declining, and this just looks like it's in a downtrend overall on pretty much all the different timeframes except that 21 EMA. So looking at the indexes, pretty negative, and we'll just have to see where we find support and if we can build out something, and if individual stocks can recover and reclaim their moving averages. Now, taking a look at those individual stocks, let's go ahead and start with the big FANG names. Then I've got a list right here of stocks I want to go through. So first taking a look at, let's start with Apple here. This was super strong off the lows here, broke the short-term trend line, and now looks like it's forming a lower high. We're undercutting that 21 EMA. I'd love to see it kind of hold near 160, chop around here, build out a formation, then attempt to break out towards all-time highs. I think that would be extremely productive, but we'll have to see what happens. Maybe the 50 SMA kind of catches up to price here. But this move off the lows was pretty unsustainable, so it's natural that we're seeing some type of selling. But nevertheless, I don't like the look of this bar. Downside reversal on an increase in volume. Looking at Google, you can see that this is weaker overall than Apple, but we see that same negative action on this Friday. So not great to see this from those kind of mega cap names. Looking at Facebook, actually Meta, I do that all the time now. You can see negative action, but once again, this has been absolutely destroyed. Looking at Amazon, you can see negative action after this gap up. It's most likely going to fill this gap. We'll have to see. But I think this could be a big area of interest because that 50 SMA is also lining up with that spot. And also taking a look at NVIDIA in the semi space. I think this is a very interesting case because we had a negative earnings report. A lot of people were expecting it to drop significantly, but it actually had a positive day on that day. But then obviously the news hit and the overall market was negative, and we basically reversed that positive action on this Friday on pretty much identical volume right here. Also taking a look at Netflix. This to me just isn't a leadership stock anymore. You can see we're below a declining 200 SMA. We're starting to build off these lows, but it's just not a strong stock anymore. And right now we're just in the stage 4 decline. So the mega caps are pretty negative. Apple is the strongest of the bunch. And also taking a look at Tesla. This is much more constructive than all of them except for Apple pretty much. We're holding near that 21 EMA. We're holding, looks like just above these week's lows. So I'd love to see it kind of build and hold above these lows as well. Get back above its 21 EMA, get back towards 300 and try to break out of the structure that we're forming. But ideally it holds that 50 SMA to the upside and builds out a longer term base. We do have a little bit of work to do before we get to all-time highs and have a decent amount of overhead supply, but this looks overall decently constructive. Earnings are still good, although you're seeing some deceleration in terms of earnings. Sales, margins also taking a hit compared to the previous quarter, and estimates are still strong, but estimate revisions are down, so that's something to keep in mind. So overall, once again, not a super great look, and you can see the 200 SMA is basically holding back the stock as of this moment. With that said, let's move on over to some names that have been acting a lot better. First things first, talking about the solar names. ENPH has been one of the leaders here, holding that 21 EMA nicely. But on this Friday, we are seeing downside reversal action on an increase in volume. I'd expect some short-term weakness. I'd love to see it hold these lows as well as ideally the 21 EMA here, form out, just one more higher low, maybe one more contraction, then an attempt of a breakout through this 308 pivot. But that's ideal. Obviously, we're going to get what we're going to get. But right now, it's still holding that 20 EMA, which is constructive. FSLR, another solar name that's been super strong. Downside reversal here on Friday, although it was just a hair positive here. Needs a consolidation for me before I would consider entering. I'd love to see it kind of pull back, form some contractions, let that 21 EMA catch up to price, and then set up a nice pivot right here. That would be ideal. You can manage risk right at that prior swing low. And that would also give it a nice chance for that 50 SMA to catch up to price and for it to not have that super extended look that it has right now. Super strong after this earnings gap up. And you can see that earnings surprise really drove this stock extremely higher as it caught the overall Wall Street off guard. So that is it for FSLR. Also bring up another solar name that I'm watching pretty closely, Airy. Decent action on Friday, holding or actually closing above these lows, not holding them. But I love to see this form out a base over the next, few days, few weeks to go sideways, let that 50 SMA catch up to price, and then set up a pivot right here. I think that'd be very constructive. Earnings are super strong, especially last quarter, up 350%. Sales up 116%. This is the type of quarter that you want to pay attention to, and you can see the momentum after it occurred. Estimates are absolutely ridiculous. 650% for this year, 213% for next year. And yeah, this is definitely a name that you should have your eye on. Looking at a weekly chart, there is some overhead supply to deal with, but you can see how most of the volume has occurred back here. You've got a potential inverse head and shoulders forming. and it's breaking out strongly through this kind of low base down here, and a decent look actually on the weekly in terms of last week closing in the upper range, when the overall market, if you go back to, let's just go to the QQQ, closed very negative on that week. You can see how strong Aerie was in comparison. So just in general, looking at next week, look at the weekly charts, see where the stocks closed. Are they holding their moving averages? Look at those kind of signs of relative strength, and then key in on the ones that are holding up well and forming proper patterns in general. Moving on to some more semi names, let's take a look at GFS. This was acting super strong and actually entered on this day, got stopped out for a small loss on this day. Undercut these lows just a bit, but I'd love to see some consolidation over the next few weeks and months. You've got kind of a confluence and pivots a little bit, 61, 65 around that area. You can see in the past that that's been a spot where it's run into some supply. And I'd love to see it break out on volume, indicating a little bit of a change in character and for it to push back towards these previous highs. But really nice earnings, sales margins. Estimates aren't super great, but we'll have to see what happens with the stock. Also taking a look in this space, we've got ON, which had a really nice breakout. Then it completely reversed on this Friday, but still holding these week's lows, as well as the 21 EMA, which is increasing. So what I would actually love to see is maybe an inside day, maybe an undercut and reclaim of this spot, an inside day, and then you could buy the re-breakout. Or if this continues to break out, if it forms some tightness versus that 21 EMA, that could be kind of a low cheat spot to get in, manage risk right at this swing low. But definitely a name to watch. We're right at all-time highs during a correction. This is the type of stock that you want to be focused on, especially when it has this type of earnings, sales, margin numbers, and really nice estimates for this year as well. Moving on, here's another solar name that I meant to talk about before, DQ. China stocks in general are holding up a lot better than the rest of the market. And this is a China solar name, so it's kind of got confluence of potential themes there. A nice breakout through a DTL on Friday, great close as well on an increase in volume. Looks like the highest in quite a while, but it still has to push its way through these highs. Overall earnings numbers are pretty strong. Estimates are great for this year. A little bit of a decrease in 2023, but another name to have on your radar, especially for maybe an inside day. You could do an inside day and up setup early next week. Moving on, we've got GTLB, which is a recent IPO, trying to form something off the bottom here. We're forming some higher lows right here, holding that 50 SMA. You've got to basically pivot right here, early consolidation pivot. I love to see it push through this on volume. You can measure us right at the low of this day, which also lines up with the 21 EMA. And you've got kind of a confluence of resistance right at 65, which is right where we're at, right where that pivot would be as well. So trying to push up, got pushed down by the overall market, as you can see, but still is holding up better than most stocks. Moving on, we've also got some kind of medical biotech names. We've got SWAV. This has been holding up great and basically ignoring this market pullback. You can see that in the relative strength line. And I'd love to see it kind of consolidate for a few days, at least, a few weeks, ideally. Let that 21 EMA kind of catch up to price as it consolidates, form some contractions, and then lets us in with a nice pivot before it continues up. But great action, huge volume on the breakout, and so far is acting super strong. NBIX is another name that held up pretty well last week. You can see it's basically an orderly pullback on a decline in volume into that 21 EMA, and it had a nice breakout through these highs. Looking at it weekly, it's still got a little bit to deal with back here in terms of overhead supply, but so far is looking constructive. And you can see the decline in volume overall last week as it did pull back. Going back over to the daily, another name that I want to show was TH, which is a little bit volatile here, but you do have some downside reversal bars. But overall, it's holding that 21 EMA nicely and had huge volume, absolutely enormous volume on this breakout. And HRB, I believe, had similar action way back here. And this, after it pulled back, consolidated, offered some decent entry spots and had a really nice run from about 36 up to 48. So that's kind of what I'm watching for in terms of TH. Not really a leadership group here, but decent numbers and great estimates for 2023. That's pretty much it in terms of the individual stocks. Actually, there's one more, RITM. Got to spell it right, RITM. And you can see basically forming kind of a swing trade setup. I'd love to see it kind of, form out a base here under 27, but this has been super powerful off these lows. And I would love to see it let that 21 EMA catch up to price, but we've got a short-term flag forming inside day Friday, nice close, declining volume here. So this could be one that could explode quickly. Definitely move up your stops, get them in profit, because this is a very quick mover that can pull back pretty hard. You can see down 10%, down on this day, down 12%, and it can have some very volatile days. So be aware of that. There's more of a swing trade, day trade type stock more than a position trade setup, but definitely something to keep an eye on, especially how strong it's been. And you can see huge sales numbers as well. And this is in the biotech space, which is ranked 5 out of 197. So basically a leadership stock, at least in terms of price and volume, in a leading group as of the moment. So that's pretty much it for stocks that I have on my radar that are acting pretty well. Let me know your thoughts down below in the comment section, and give me your top idea as well in terms of stocks that I didn't mention so far. And moving on now to sentiment, let's start with my Twitter surveys. You can see we declined overall from 24% bullish to 21%, which is getting pretty much on the low end. But remember, the price and volume action of the indexes and the stocks themselves matters much more than these secondary indicators. Looking at the name exposure next, this declined overall, but is still reasonably high. You can see we got down to 19.86 and 19.51 around the kind of intermediate term lows here. So it can still decline quite a bit. And looking at the put call ratio, what's interesting here is this is actually declining as the market is pulling back. So still a ways to go in terms of fear with regards to this metric overall. Moving on, let's take a look at the big picture article from Friday. The headline is "Stock Market Dives as Powell Strikes Hawkish Tone. Celsius Holds Up, but Chip Stocks Take a Beating." Reading through, discuss the action after Jerome Powell's speech at Jackson Hole, Wyoming. They talk about what happened over here, some distribution days, breadth. Celsius is another name that's holding up. You can see it's holding this pivot. This will be on my weekly watch list, which I'll post tomorrow. And overall, their view is an uptrend under pressure, with now 3 distribution days on the NASDAQ, 3 on the S&P 500. You've got some leaders up in volume and some down in volume as well. Moving on, we've got the wishing well GMI signal, which is still green since July 21. And overall, the GMI score on Friday was a 5 out of 6. And Dr. Wish has shared a nice list of stocks that are pretty strong overall this year. So overall, taking everything into account, my current view is also an uptrend under pressure. Most of the time frames are down. The short term, we're below declining 5 SMA. We're below declining 21 EMA. We're below a 200 SMA, the longer term trend, but we are still above a rising 50 SMA. So will we form a higher low? Will we undercut the lows from June? No one knows, but we just have to watch the price and volume action of the indexes as well as the stocks and listen to the market. So continue to manage risk, do what works for you in terms of your time frame and your goals in the market. You do not have to be involved. I have a very heavy cash position as of the moment. I got pushed to cash in terms of a lot of the later trades that I tried last week or a week and a half ago. You just have to kind of listen to that feedback and make sure you're keeping those losses tight, and know that it's not yet the time to really step on the gas, but that time will come. Coming out of this bear market, there'll be some amazing opportunities, but we just have to be ready in terms of preserving our capital as well as our confidence as well. So best of luck. Let me know your thoughts down below in the comment section. Make sure to leave a like down below if you did enjoy, and I'll see you guys in future videos. Take care.